Welcome, everybody. My name is David Graham. I am a lawyer at Gardner Law. It's an FDA law firm in Minneapolis. And I'm glad to welcome you to a program on food safety that's presented by the Food Law Center, which is part of the Health Law Institute at Mitchell Hamlin School of Law. The Food Law Center has food law classes, including general food law, food labeling, food safety, as well as a class on litigating foodborne illness matters. We also have a concentration in food law, so you can get uh, a recognition for taking certain classes and doing work outside the school in the area of food law. We also have externships and symposia like this one that we do once or twice a year, depending on what's going on. And a lot is going on these days. So we put this together on food safety because of recent past events and changes that are possible in the future. Um, we have an there's going to be a recording available, and the details on that will be in the chat. So look at that as the program goes on, and you'll find out how that will be available to you in the future. If you have questions, put them in the chat. I'll try to monitor that. You can ask the questions as we go. Put them in as you think of them. To the extent it's possible, I'll introduce them into the conversation because that's what this is. While there'll be introductory remarks by the speakers, we're happy to address your questions as they come. So now I get the honor of introducing the panel, which we're very fortunate to have. And because these people know a lot about the subject matter for today, come from different um, uh, places in the industry and have different skills and education. So you should get a wide variety of views about food safety and what has been happening and changes that are occurring. I'm going to start by introducing Casey Lynn Gallimore. She's a senior director of regulatory policy at the Meat Institute. Casey Lynn Gallimore serves as the senior director of regulatory policy at the Meat Institute, where she provides analysis and expertise on a variety of topics, including food safety, processing animal welfare, and cybersecurity. Prior to joining the Meat Institute, um, Casey spent 7 years in the food industry in food safety, quality assurance, and regulatory compliance roles. She has worked in FDA and USDA regulated facilities, ranging from chocolate and ingredient manufacturing to portion cut steaks and market hog slaughter. Casey earned her Bachelor of Science in Biology from Truman State University with minors in chemistry and the justice system. Jay Ellingson, a PhD, is the Chief Scientific Officer at Quick Trip Inc. In 1995, Dr. Ellingson received his PhD in molecular microbiology from Marquette University in Milwaukee. Dr. Ellingson did his postdoctoral fellowship training with the USDA Agricultural Research Service National Animal Disease Center in Ames, Iowa, where he developed and patented a molecular diagnostic method for the detection of John's disease in dairy cattle. This method has been applied to the detection of the specific bacterium in both meat and dairy products. He then serves as staff molecular microbiologist with the USDA Animal and Plant Inspection Service Center for Veterinary Biologic in Ames. In 2006, Dr. Ellingson became the chief scientific officer at Quick Trip. He is responsible for the development and execution of Quick Trip Inc.'s food protection system, which includes all aspects of food protection, food safety science, food regulations, and food defense. Dr. Ellingson is an adjunct professor in the microbiology department at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse and has mentored and graduated several Masters of Science students in the microbiology program. Dr. Ellingson has been a member of numerous state and federal food protection related boards and associations. He has authored numerous scientific articles and publications and has many more credentials that I didn't want to read because it makes me feel inadequate. Ryan Osterholm is also joining us. Ryan has dedicated his entire legal career to representing people injured by foodborne illness. His passion is holding food producers accountable when they poison their customers. His unending goal is to make the food we eat safer. Ryan has a decade's worth of experience in foodborne illness litigation. He has represented people in every major foodborne illness outbreak during that time. Ryan gravitated to the science-driven foodborne illness practice in part because he comes from a medical family. His sister is a neonatologist at the University of Minnesota Masonic Children's Hospital. His mother is a former nurse practitioner. His father is an infectious disease epidemiologist. He has been around foodborne illness outbreaks and investigations since before he could walk. So we're glad to have Ryan here. When he's not working, he's growing 1,000 nearly 1,000 pound pumpkins. Another food expertise you didn't know you were going to get today. Uh, Sean Stevens, who helped me organize this program and is also a member of the Food Law Center Advisory Board, as is Ryan. And Ryan has also in the past taught the foodborne illness litigation class at Mitchell Hamlin. Sean is the founding member of Food Industry Council LLC, the only firm in the United States that represents the food industry exclusively. As a food industry consultant and lawyer, Sean works with food industry clients, including the world's largest growers, processors, restaurant chains, distributors, and grocers, helping them protect their brand by complying with FDA and USDA regulations, reducing risk, managing recalls, and defending high-profile foodborne illness claims. Sean also speaks regularly to national and international audiences on a wide variety of emerging scientific, regulatory, and food safety trends. So thank you all for joining. And we're going to start out by getting a view of what is going on in food safety from each of our panelists. And I'm going to start with you, Sean. So why don't you go ahead and give us your perspective, and we'll address questions as they come and as I interpose them.
That sounds great, David. Thank you so much for the introduction. I want to thank the distinguished panelists for joining us today. What a great opportunity to get some extremely high-level perspectives on recent changes in the administration and the potential impact on the regulators, the regulations themselves, and industry, the current status of actual or anticipated policy enforcement or regulatory enforcement changes that may be on the horizon, and the current status of civil litigation risks exposure and different things companies perhaps can do to avoid, right, that risk or exposure. It's a really great panel, and I'm honored to be a part of it. If we look at some of the broader trends from my perspective, I want to talk a little bit about what we witnessed in 2024 with respect to changes in regulatory approaches towards mainly pathogens, and some of the significant, I guess I would say, just changes that we witnessed over the course of the last 18 or so months. And then the rest of the panel, I think, will have a discussion and be able to add additional insight as to what we think the future holds and where we go from there. But, one of the things we saw early in 2024 was a shift in both on the FDA and USDA side in the regulators' approach towards listeria control. And in the past, from my experience, when a company had a product that was in the market that tested positive for listeria, a ready-to-eat product, or if through its own testing, maybe it had a test and hold failure and product was released that was positive and they had to bring it back, the regulatory agencies allow those companies to very precisely, do their root source investigation, determine what the problem was, contain it, and limit it, to a shift or to a particular line in many cases. And I think those days are gone. What we've seen is the regulators they're more inclined to really test companies' internal determinations, to force broader recalls and not accept the company's determination with respect to the narrowness that a problem might be, and actually forcing companies to cast a wider net and recall broader products. The other change we saw early in the year, and as it carried throughout the year with a number of larger scale recalls involving Listeria, was the agent and Salmonella. The agency's request, or in some cases, direction or command that the company stop producing food products until the agency was satisfied that whatever issue occurred was identified and corrected to the agency's satisfaction, which is something that we didn't see in the past. Usually, when we had an issue, those companies were allowed to continue producing while we did that regulatory ballet and worked with the agencies to get their concerns addressed. Well, now we're seeing the regulators force companies to shut their doors, at least until the problems are fixed. So that was a big change. And then more recently in December, we saw USDA issue its new Listeria guidance notice, making some changes to its approach to Listeria controls and facilities. And what we saw in the guidance was requirements that USDA conduct basically weekly interviews or questionnaires with food companies directed at trying to determine whether they had a good Listeria control program, and B, whether they may have some Listeria control issues. And what we kind of saw from that guidance was memorializing what we saw, how we saw the agencies reacting in the previous 12 months with respect to their approach to companies' Listeria control. So, all of this was very new. And then layered on top of that, we had a number of larger scale recalls in the last 12, 18 months. And we're seeing now, especially with the regulators' response to the companies, the insurance companies are now kind of following suit. And when we have these recalls, sitting back and asking themselves, maybe we should do a deep dive into the history of this company's food safety programs and whether they've been effectively implemented to determine, just like the regulators would do, whether there were failures that could have been avoided and whether the recall that occurred, or God forbid, an outbreak, could have been avoided. And if so, puts the insurance company in position to make a determination whether insurance will even be available. And they may say, you know what, this is an instance you could have prevented. The government forced you to recall more product than you normally would have, and they forced you to shut your doors. It must have been pretty bad. So we see now the availability of insurance being threatened, perhaps. And then, just in closing, I'll say, we've continued to see over the course of last year, when there are outbreaks that make people sick, very close scrutiny to see if there is any merits to DOJ involvement, trying to take a close look at what happened and determine if enhanced civil or criminal penalties might be appropriate. So those are sort of broad stroke changes we've seen in the last 24 months. They're pretty significant in my view, and it'll be interesting to see what happens as we move forward with the new administration, where this kind of all goes.
Thanks, Sean. Casey, what would you like to say in the introduction here?
Thank you very much. And pleasure to be on this panel today talking about a very important topic, not just for the entire industry, but obviously very specific to the meat industry. So
Sorry to interrupt you, Casey.
uh,
Could you say a little bit about the Meat Institute? Because
that's
not
what
a
I
lot
was
of
about
people
to
might
do.
know about it that aren't closely connected or working in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I work at the Meat Institute, which is a trade association which represents packers and processors of meat and poultry. Our members, it is a member-based organization. Our members make the vast majority of animal protein that you eat on a regular basis. So we have over 300 packer processor members that are operating over 800 USDA inspected establishments in the United States. It's many of the big names that you would recognize and a lot of little names that are smaller, more regional focused packers and processors. So our role as a trade association is to support those folks in what they do so that they can do their job and feed the world. And so there's a lot of different ways that we do that. One of the ways is providing food safety and regulatory support. So obviously, we were racked by what happened in 2024. I think there's a lot of folks that like to focus on one of the incidents, but one of the things I like to remind folks is there wasn't just one incident in 2024. There were several and unfortunately, several deadly incidents relating to Listeria monocytogenes specifically. But that wasn't our only issue. I think, you know, agree with everything that Sean said. We're going to see the wake of what happened in 2024 will be long. I think we still have not seen all the changes that we are likely to see from USDA in response to the events of 2024. I think we as an industry are still responding. Um, we're still, trying to focus on what happened, what can we do to prevent, this from happening again. Um, as far as what happened, I think there's been a lot of discussions from an industry, and there was nothing new or unique or different about Listeria, about the pathogen, about how it reacts. What we have identified is that we have been going through a transition. We had a good run, a very good run as an industry. And in the time period that we had a really good run, we lost a lot of institutional knowledge. We lost a lot of the folks, both in the industry and in the government agencies, who had been through the muck 20 years ago when we were not having a good run. And so we lost some of those folks that not only really truly understood from living through it what we needed to do to control Listeria, but also the why and how it truly impacted folks. So that's what we're trying to get back to, is those basic practices that need to be in place to make sure people not only understand what they need to do, but why they need to do it and the true importance of it, and make sure that that is reflected at all levels within a company, not just your boots on the ground food safety folks. It really has to be throughout the entire company culture. I always tell our members when we're talking about what's coming, what is on the regulatory agenda, what we think the agencies are going to do, all of that flies out the window when you have a major outbreak, especially one with significant illnesses, especially one where you have deaths. And that's exactly what happened to us. We were very focused on salmonella, and that's where the regulators were really focused. And all of a sudden, we have pivoted and we are turning. We're not losing focus on salmonella, but obviously, Listeria popped up as something that we need to be addressing more. Um, so yeah, that's kind of where we're at, and I look forward to further discussion. You are muted,
Nope.
David.
Dr. Ellingson, sorry, I'm going to turn to you next because you
Sure.
actually make products. But just so people have, and Ryan will ask you to also talk about this, but not only would we like to hear about Quick Trip's food production business, because that's obviously what you drive and protect, but also the difference between the pathogens and why Listeria might be different. And so if people out there don't understand the differences, they might get a better grasp of why we're saying this was unusual or different or something like that. Is that
Sure.
okay?
Sure. Well, David, thank you. And I appreciate being on the panel. And there's a lot of discussion we'll probably go through over the next hour or so here while we're sitting in this on this Zoom call. I mentioned earlier that I'm the chief science officer here at Quick Trip. I've been with the company about 20 years. Some of you probably on this call don't understand that we're a family-owned business based out of La Crosse, Wisconsin. We own about 900 retail stores in 6 states currently, soon to be 7. We own and operate 8 production facilities, and we self-distribute to those stores. So when you go into a Quick Trip, and a lot of people don't understand this, but about 90% of what's sold in our stores comes out of our distribution center in La Crosse. And of that, the products that are in the stores, about 65% are manufactured here on site in La Crosse. So you look at the 8 production facilities, and it when we were starting to talk about putting this panel together, I got thinking about driving home one night. I thought about we serve about 12 million guests a week in those 900 stores. And so it becomes a real challenge as things move in the government, things slide with the legal side of the business. Our goal is to protect public health, number one, with the food products we sell, and then also on the side note is to protect the brand. And so you talk about, managing risk inside of an organization like this. I think our company a long time ago, the owners agreed that science needed to be a part of that process. And so um, we've implemented programs in place since back in 2006 that literally manages risk, if you will, through a science-based process. So the things that have changed with the government recently, and it has had some impact on our company, is that we've had to really ratchet up the things that we had already implemented back in 2006. And why do I say that? Well, when you serve 12 million guests a week, you understand what the risk is. And we do have a kitchen commissary in our campus here that is USDA inspected. And so, ironically enough, it serves both FDA and USDA products that come out of that facility. And so we have a unique environment where you have one line that might be a USDA line, and right next to it is a FDA line. And so managing that with science is its own situation. Where are we at today? Over the last 3 years, we anticipated that, with the outbreaks that were taking place, the deaths that had taken place in the industry, and I'm not talking just about USDA side of the business, I'm talking about also things with leafy greens and so on and so forth. We realized we needed to ratchet up the programs that we had internally. And so I'd like to get into a conversation as we kind of go through the day here about what we've done with Salmonella and Listeria. We do that. That is a major focus for us. I do believe after these events that took place in, early 2024 and moving into 2025, what we're seeing with the federal government is that there is a ratcheting up, if you will, with on-site inspectors asking very targeted questions about the programs that we have on a weekly basis, even to the point of, where does this science lead to managing our risk in our organization? So, I think the changes in some cases are good. I think it's going to be a challenge, though, down the road for some companies that don't have the systems and have the resources to manage these risks as they start ratcheting this up over the next, 2 to 4 years. And so, I think that will become a challenge inside the food supply chain in the country. So, our organization, again, we have the 8 production facilities, only one of which is, under the tutelage, if you will, of the USDA inspection process. But with that said, FDA still has as well ratcheted up their inspection process along with the states around the upper Midwest area. So I guess I'll leave it at that. We're seeing a lot of changes going on. We do have really good communication with state and federal agencies. We're a little bit unique business. We do open up our doors. We have an event that we have in September where we invite in all the regulatory agencies to that event. They literally get to look under the hood, if you will, here on campus and see what we do. And we feel that's important to have that collaboration with the government as they are inspecting us, but we want them to understand that we are transparent in our process. So I think I'll leave it at that and then we can get into other further discussions.
Yes, thank you very much. Ryan, can you talk about a little more about what you do, what you're seeing, and also about the impacts of the pathogens on the people you represent so people can understand a little bit about why this is important? So at the end of the day, everybody's trying to prevent illness. So, yeah,
Right. Thank you, David. And
yeah,
um, I probably have a little bit of a unique role on this panel in that, I represent these people, and sometimes the industry folks think that I'm kind of their adversary. But I know that, Sean and Dr. Ellingson, who I've worked with professionally in the past, I don't think that they would agree with that because we all want the same thing. All of us want the same thing, which is safe food. It's not good for industry. It's not good for consumers. It's not good for anyone. Unfortunately, my role in this is to pick up the pieces when things go wrong. So I exclusively represent people who are sickened with foodborne illness in pretty much the United States. Um, so I founded OFT Food Safety Law about 6 years ago with another lawyer that we broke off from to kind of solely focus on foodborne illness law and really try to learn and know everything there is about this from a plaintiff's legal standpoint. Um, there's only a handful of firms in the country that really focus on this particular subject area. And so it's something that I'm able to devote really every professional waking minute to this. And that, learning about what happens and what doesn't happen and how these things happen and pursuing compensation for individuals that have suffered foodborne illness. The types of cases that I'm normally involved in are, well, right now, I represent about 30 individuals who were sickened in the Boar's Head Listeria monocytogenes outbreak, which Casey had referred to. And that is one of the largest listeria outbreaks that we've had in probably about a decade. Probably since Jensen Farms cantaloupe. And it was somewhat unique in that previous listeria outbreaks that we had seen um, were frequently in much smaller operators or very unique products, imported products or a unique product. And so this was the first listeria outbreak that we've dealt with in this particular meat product that made this many people sick with such a high profile brand. And so it was something that was in the vernacular of most Americans. Almost everyone has heard of it. And certainly that's not what they wanted. And I think that, we're working through that. And I think that they have done, my personal editorial is that they certainly want to get better and are certainly doing that. But there's very, very few things that are an existential crisis to food companies like a major foodborne illness outbreak. We've seen it time and again, and there's things, and that's what the other panelists here are trying to instill in their clients and the folks that they work for is that this is something that you got to take very, very, very seriously. We represent several individuals who died in the outbreak. We represent several individuals who are brain injured in the outbreak. And that's the very, very difficult thing about listeria vis-a-vis other pathogens that I more frequently work with. Listeria is relatively rare in a total amount of illnesses per year. However, the consequences of listeria monocytogenes infection are usually extremely grave. So one of the things that is, well, frankly scary for me and what I do from a regulatory framework and is I just think there's just a ton of unknowns right now. How I prove my cases really is through the records that I'm able to obtain from investigatory agencies. Usually, the heavy lifting is done on the state and local level. And those perhaps are a little less affected by what's going on, but certainly affected, at least from a funding standpoint. But on the federal level, it's it's like nothing I've ever seen before. The Right now, if you do a FOIA request to the Centers for Disease Control, you'll get an automatic email saying that the entire FOIA office is on administrative leave. And that's not good for anyone, because the the industry needs to know to have access to things as well. And need to know, and frankly, they have a right to know, especially if they're being implicated in an outbreak, and they hire individuals like Sean. They have every right to know. Well, what are you seeing? How do you how are you coming up with this? And you can make a judgment call whether that's they got it right or not. And obviously, no one's perfect. But right now, if I was to wave a wand and predict the future about where we're going right now in terms of the investigative agencies, I wouldn't know. It's so hard to know where this is going to go. And so it's certainly something that is front and center of what I do on a daily basis. And if these investigations aren't going to happen, my fear from the plaintiff's perspective is that it'll come to a head eventually when there's enough people that are sick. But what we want to do and what everyone on this panel wants is that, to prevent these outbreaks to start with, but if they are to happen and there is an issue, to limit them limit them as much as possible. And that, a Listeria monocytogenes outbreak in a nationally distributed product, that sickened, 70, 80, 100 people confirmed, really more than that, is, in my opinion, is really a never should happen event. And if the investigative agencies aren't there kind of, first of all, trying to prevent this, but second of all, once they realize there's a problem, letting them know so they can stop this. My fear is we're going to have kind of a catastrophic outbreak that's going to look much, much worse than anything we've seen, just because it's going to get so bad before they're able to detect it. So that's a little bit about what I do, and excited to talk about industry and the role that I play.
Thanks, Ryan. Casey, we've been alluding to a recent history that seems to be unusual in terms of outbreaks. And so I want to give a little more detail to people. Anybody can join on this. I'll start with Casey about a little more detail about what happened the last 12 to 18 months with outbreaks, and so people understand what we're talking about in terms of what industry has to do and what Ryan is busy with. And I wonder if you could start us out with that.
Yeah. So what a lot of what we're kind of dancing around, and Ryan is in a position to not dance around it, which is helpful.
Say it.
Just say it. Is that in July of 2024, we started to see the beginnings of an outbreak investigation. And generally speaking, there's a couple things for those of you that are not so very focused on outbreak investigations, public health, foodborne illnesses. One thing that I always try and keep in the back of my brain is that 98% of foodborne illnesses are not attributed to an outbreak. So we talk a lot about outbreaks. We focus a lot on outbreaks because that's what we are able to focus on. That's what we have the most information on. That's what we're able to connect those dots and get back to a source. But there's way more foodborne illness out there, unfortunately, that's sporadic and very hard to connect the dots on. I will say that over the years, we're getting better and better at connecting dots. We're able to attribute more illnesses to outbreaks, which is able to kind of help us better inform where illnesses are coming from and where issues are. But that's kind of one thing that I always try and keep in the back of my head. But in July 2024, we started hearing about an investigation into a Listeria monocytogenes outbreak. And early on in an investigation, generally what's happening is that state and local health departments are getting information on foodborne illnesses, and all that data. Hopefully, there's really good data that comes from those illnesses. If we can get samples from case patients, then we can sequence those and we can understand exactly what they got sick from, and we can know the genetic fingerprint of the bacteria that they got sick from. And then if they have that, that gets put into a national database. And that's where CDC, FDA, and USDA get involved. And once we start seeing a pattern, hey, we've got multiple people that have gotten this exact same bacterial strain, that's when we can start connecting those dots on outbreaks. And that's when, if it crosses state lines and multiple states are involved, that's when you get CDC and the federal agencies involved. And that's when, the health agencies have already hopefully started asking patients, what have you been eating? And that's when you start to pull all of this information together. So within the first couple months, we started seeing, different case patients in different states, and we started getting information that, okay, there's some themes here. We saw liverwurst as a common theme. We saw, certain grocery stores as a common theme. And then as more data gets compiled, that's when we were able to see that it was connected back to boar's head and specifically a particular plant. That, again, I mentioned that was not the only major Listeria event in 2024. Later that summer, and I will say we generally see, unfortunately, the hot months, we are a bigger problem for Listeria. And so later, a couple months later, we started seeing another, unfortunately, deadly outbreak that was associated with a much smaller processor. I know somebody mentioned that generally we see it as smaller, and that was kind of what was odd with Boar's Head, as it was a bigger name brand. So that we had a second meat product deadly outbreak associated with a smaller company. We also saw a massive recall. There were no illnesses attributed, but we saw a massive recall from a company last year where there was kind of some downstream testing. And so it was found within the supply chain. So we did not see illnesses from that, but it was another indicator that it was not just a single company. It was kind of maybe more of a broader industry situation that needed to be addressed. And David, you asked earlier what makes Listeria unique. There's a couple different things that make Listeria unique, and Jay is way smarter on this and can fill in where I fail. But
I was going to go to him next, so go ahead.
A couple things just to note is, Ryan mentioned that when people don't often get sick from Listeria, so a lot of people get exposed to Listeria. It's ubiquitous in our environment, like it's everywhere. But it takes a lot of it to get you sick. And a lot of people's immune systems can deal with Listeria. But when you do get listeriosis, the hospitalization rate and the death rate for listeriosis is significantly higher than salmonellosis or E. coli. It's just those who do get sick, they get real sick. So that's one thing that's very unique about Listeria. Why Listeria is so problematic and ready-to-eat foods is because it does not care about refrigeration. Things like bacteria like Salmonella and E. coli, they can survive through refrigeration, but they won't grow, generally speaking. Listeria has no problem growing in refrigerated and frozen temperatures. And so even if you have a little bit of Listeria when you start out, if you have a ready-to-eat item that's not going to get any kind of cooking at home, if it sits in your refrigerator for the next month, that Listeria is growing in that product. And maybe it wouldn't have gotten you sick at that little amount when it was first there, but by the time it grows in a refrigerated environment, it's enough to cause listeriosis.
Dr. Ellingson.
Yes.
Can you talk a little more about Listeria? This is not meant to be a Listeria seminar, but
Sure.
it's important. And just two things. I'm sure you might have covered them. One is obviously you try to prevent it, but also what happens if you find it. My understanding in working with clients and having worked on cases, back a while now, but it's not that easy to get rid of.
Right. So I'm glad Casey brought this up. I mean,
Yeah.
we call Listeria monocytogenes very fastidious, meaning it can survive in a wide range of temperature, a wide range of pH, and kind of once it gets in the environment, it becomes hard to get it out. And a lot of companies these days, they use environmental monitoring as being their mechanism. Not that they don't test the products that come in and out of their facilities, but environmental monitoring is really a huge piece of this puzzle. And with the new things that have transpired after these outbreaks, I think more and more testing your environment, the zones of which, and I'll talk a little bit about zone. Zone 1 is direct contact with food products. Zone 2 is juxtaposition to like on a leg of a conveyor belt, if you will. I think after these events that have taken place, and not that the USDA and FDA weren't down that road already, but after these events and the things that have transpired in the last 24 months, I think Listeria monocytogenes or testing for Listeria in these facilities has really become a target program now for USDA FSIS. And so, you kind of my background is in molecular microbiology, and Listeria in itself creates bad disease if you get it. I thought Casey made a great point when she brought up about the fact that what we don't know from a health standpoint is individuals are all unique, and Listeria reacts differently with different individuals. We've never, it's zero tolerance in this country. So you can't have it in the product, you can't have it in your environment. And if you do, you have to react. And so, we started back in 2023 thinking that, stuff comes in, it's ubiquitous. This organism, like I said, survives in multiple environments. So it can be drug in on a pallet, for a lack of a better term. And so we really ratcheted up our programs because of the way the organism survives in the environment, because of even through the cleaning practices, it can get caught up in its niche environments, i.e., some type of biological microfilm or whatever. And so we really have changed our programs inside of our organization because of that. Now, the outbreaks also have pushed the envelope with the federal agencies because when you get Listeria, to Casey's point, it's not a disease or a bacterial infection you like. And the docs have a tough time these days, first of all, diagnosing it, number two, then treating it and trying to react appropriately. So, from a microbiological standpoint, it's an organism that we all, key players in the industry, are really looking at as being that's your indication whether or not you have a good food safety program in your organization. And so, salmonella, I hate to say it. I mean, it's an organism nobody wants to get, but you can kill that organism pretty quickly and with heat or alike. And because the cell wall of that organism is not very tough. Listeria, on the other hand, is, like I said, is very survivable in a wide range of environments. And so it becomes part of the problem of where the government, when they're regulating these things, why they're focusing so much in that area.
How do you get rid of it?
Good sanitizers, good hard work cleaning practices. People don't realize the old, washing with detergents is the best way to do it. It's just wash, rinse, sanitize, and sanitizers that keeps the environment clean after it's been cleaned by a detergent. The detergent is the key here, breaking the cell wall and allowing the organism to essentially die because it has no mechanism for replication. So, we use heavy detergents, we use foaming, we use those type of techniques on a daily basis on direct contact, indirect contact. And then what we do is after we've cleaned it up, we test the environments to make sure that the cleaning practices are working appropriately. And after the incidents that happened in 2024, I'll tell everybody on the call here that USDA have really asked the questions. They are delving deeper and deeper every time they sit down with our staff, not only our food safety staff, but also the sanitation crew, and asking specific questions. What are we doing? Where are we doing it? If you find something, how are you cleaning it up? That whole process. And so what we're seeing is there's more detail going on with FSIS inside of that specific facility that we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you. Sean, yeah, I was just going to go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of follow-up thoughts. If we look at what's happening with Listeria currently, I've been practicing for over 25 years, and I see a lot of parallels to what's happening now with Listeria that we saw back with E. coli 15787 in the beef industry. And we're in a place where, everybody's focused on E. coli. There was heightened awareness. CDC was looking for it, right? We were doing PFG, pulse field gel electrophoresis testing, and there was more testing within the industry, but all of the science and the testing and the detection was outpacing the industry's current ability to find it and eliminate it and control it, right? And it took a while for industry to kind of, so we saw all these outbreaks happening, but we kept detecting it. And it took a while for industry in its programs and control to kind of catch up with where the detection science was. And I'm seeing a lot of parallels here where listeria is now on people's minds. We're increasingly testing for it. We talked about the very large scale outbreak that didn't involve any illnesses in the last, late last year because of internal industry testing. Our surveillance capabilities continue to improve where we're detecting more illnesses out there. But industry, I think, kind of believed over the course of the last decade that, yeah, we'll have environmental monitoring and yeah, we'll see listeria on occasion and yes, we'll react to it and we'll aggressively clean, aggressively sanitize, retest, it's gone, and we'll believe it's gone and we'll just keep operating as usual. But listeria is so difficult to eliminate, as to Jay's point, and there's debate about whether it can be eliminated in some environments at all. And there's regulators who say it can, and there's regulators who say, no, I get it. In some environments, you just will not be able to get rid of it. But it's there. But I think the industry hasn't, the programs, the control programs haven't evolved and matured to the point that Jay's describing now, what needs to be done to beat it back to the greatest extent possible. So even when it is there, it's not affecting your products at those high levels that are going to make people sick. And I think it's going to take a little time for industry, and obviously the regulators are pushing industry along to kind of wake up, sit up a little taller in their chairs and say, okay, if I'm seeing sporadic hits on listeria and I'm seeing the same pattern over the course of weeks, months, even years, I need to do something about that, right? And not just kind of, it's just the regular business. I'll say one last thing. Everybody was taught, and we've mentioned it here, listeria is everywhere. It's in the environment. It's, people can bring it in, ingredients can bring it in, equipment can bring it in. And once it finds residence in a niche, it can be in a facility. And because I think industry as a whole has sort of been resigned to, yeah, we should expect to find it. And if we're not finding it, we're doing something wrong. We're almost resigned to a certain extent failure in some organizations. And I think we need to sort of change the way we talk and look at listeria with more importance, look at it with more urgency, and attack it more aggressively when it's there so that we don't see those large scale outbreaks occurring where we're all kind of caught off guard and a little bit by surprise.
I think there's from the matters that I've dealt with that there's also, at least in this is going away, but 8, 10 years ago, there was a belief that one, you couldn't get rid of it, and two, it meant leveling facilities and rebuilding refrigeration, whole refrigeration units and warehouses and things. And so confronting it seemed prohibitively costly and inconvenient. So that's not a suggestion about industry at all. I'm just saying I gathered from talking to people that there was this belief, right? That if I acknowledge this, I'm just signing my company up to rebuilding facilities and things like that. Ryan, are you on?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to ask you a question that you might not be able to answer.
Oh boy.
One is, well, the first one is me, if you can describe what the general theory is about the boar's head contamination, right? What happened?
Um,
You told our class, I figured you could tell these folks.
I probably shouldn't get into
Okay,
the
all right,
details
then
of
don't
that,
worry.
just given some of the stuff that's happened. But um, it was a problem with the liverwurst. And so what was unique about that, and what I think one of the issues was that they were cooking it in these, they call them lopes, in these kind of big batches. And when it
You're
got to the
talking
gut,
about processed meat, further
yeah,
processed meat products. So,
yeah,
right.
like it was liverwurst was the main issue. And but what was unique about this, well, first of all, you know, the Sean had mentioned pulse field gel electrophoresis, and now Listeria was really the first pathogen that pretty much every clinical isolate was being whole genome sequenced, and now that's being done on a lot of things, and that's an extremely powerful technology and a great win for industry and public health, because you can pretty much rule in and out these people to outbreaks. It's really pretty binary. They're in or they're out of these outbreaks. Not always, but by and large. But so we knew that that there was a big listeria outbreak, and they were all whole genome matches, and so we knew they were coming from a point source. But it was in thankfully it was such a unique product that the the epidemiological questionnaires came up that when they kept getting hits on liverwurst, it's such a unique product compared. Whereas when we see these outbreaks with like romaine, well, or cilantro or parsley or something that's just much more ubiquitous in a lot of different foods, and people don't really realize that they're even eating some of these sometimes or don't think about it. It's not remarkable. That can be much more difficult from an epidemiological standpoint. But this one, they kind of honed it on pretty quickly. But there are some unique ones is that and many of my clients are this way, is that they were slicing this in the delis, and hey, give me, 3 pounds of turkey, 3 pounds of ham, 3 pounds of liverwurst, and they were slicing it on these deli slicers. Well, that introduced a whole, several of these people that didn't eat liverwurst were getting sick because the liverwurst was just used in the slicer for the previous customer, and and then their product was contaminated, and it's not even I would don't I won't give this up in court, but it's not feasible for a deli slicer to be broken down and washed after each use. And so it just kind of goes to show that you got to really think about all these things. But really, it was a problem with that and in the room there at this one facility. And like I said, two board heads credit, I think that they deeply want to understand what happened. They weren't saying, "Hey, it wasn't us" or anything like that. They want to, and they frankly hired lawyers that I would hire if I was in that spot, like they are. But they deeply want to understand what happened and how to prevent it. And so that's what you want after the fact. The best thing would be to have it not happen. The second best thing was to acknowledge it and kind of figure out what happened. And ultimately, they ended up closing this entire facility. And I don't believe they have any intention of reopening it.
Yeah, so I won't ask you the second question because I know you can't answer it, but I will. The question is, what does the paper reflect in the investigation in intercompany communications and with outside testing units or companies, excuse me, and in the matters I've dealt with, and now these are most recent would be 4 years ago, a unwillingness to acknowledge presumptive positives or wait too long to
You,
follow up on them. Presumptive positives are those that show that there's a possibility that the pathogen exists, and they happen. It's not. So maybe Dr. Ellingson can talk about the
uh,
test. I think it'd be worth
yeah.
it. But
Well, first,
anyway,
David, I'm just not at liberty to discuss because
no,
I'm in
that's why
And,
I.
and I and I can
ongoing litigation.
I can jump in
Sean's
and
over there saying, "Don't you say a thing. You're such a protective
I
order."
can jump in and talk a little bit about some
Yeah.
experiences here on our end from, I mean, again, listeria, like we've been talking about, is ubiquitous. So, and it can be brought into a facility. And I think it has to be clear for everybody on this group that, you can eliminate risk. If you're in food, you have inherent risk in the process. I want everybody at a high level to understand that. So then it boils then right down to how do you mitigate risk? What's the process to mitigate risk? And every company, a lot of companies come at it from different angles. We just happen to look at it like we think, you are what your environment is. So we look at environmental sampling as being a key cog to this process of mitigating risk. And I'm going to keep using that word mitigating, not eliminating and mitigating risk. The other component of this is you need to know who your upstream suppliers or where you're getting your sourcing material from. And you need to understand, what is their food safety culture? What is the science that they use in those facilities? Do they have buy-in from the ownership of those companies? Again, that ties into that culture aspect. From a scientific standpoint, I mean, if one company tells you out there that they've never had any listeria hit in their drains or in their garbage area or whatever, I would shake my head and say, well, that just can't be. Now, some people don't, if you don't test or hardly test, you're not going to find it. I think you got to balance all of this. You got to test enough to know that you are you are really looking for it. Sometimes our industry calls it seek and destroy. You're looking for sites out there. You're looking for these unique niches that maybe the cleaning practices, or you didn't get to that spot, or you didn't wash it correctly, or whatever. We as an organization do seek and destroy a lot with our coworkers that are out there involved with pulling samples from the environment. And so what happens if you get a hit? You get a hit, and I'll just give an example of a drain. You get a hit from a drain, we then want to know where the heck that's going, or where did it come from around that. So they call it vectoring, where you go out and you collect more samples to determine where the source could be coming from. And so I think of companies, and I feel good about where we're at today, and I'm knocking on wood on this end. Um, but we have historical data that shows, and we're mitigating or managing the risk, if you will. Again, we all want to eliminate. We don't want to have any risk in your facilities, but I think companies that don't look at it from that perspective, i.e., managing risk, and they think that we don't want to know anything about it, that's its own camp.
Right.
Then, and maybe they're not doing enough testing. But if you're mitigating risk, I think every company that's out there that's actually doing it, and doing it at least down the right path, that the government feel comfortable, and I think the companies are trying to be proactive, go out and find whatever the problems are and then try to knock it back. I think Sean said it earlier, you're always constantly knocking things back. I don't think knocking down a building stops anything. It may for a while, but 9 times out of 10, if your supply chain is very similar or the same, it's going to come back into the environment again. And so I feel having a robust environmental monitoring program is a good thing for the company.
Sure.
And so, and I feel like with the technology today, and again, my PhD work is in molecular microbiology, so I used to find genes that make things unique. Everybody on this call have a gene that makes you who you are, and my PhD work is in finding that gene. And we have systems out there right now with the technology that literally can find a needle in a haystack. And so I know there's some resistance to some companies wanting to run that type of test because, again, it's very sensitive, very specific. But if you use that tool, you can manage your risk, and specifically for Listeria monocytogene. So hopefully that's a roundabout way of telling you that you got to have a system in place, and you got to use good science to figure out whether or not you're truly managing the risk or not.
Casey, you have a big job, right? I
We
mean,
do.
so I hear described sophisticated in testing, and I work with clients, and I work with outside testing companies, but somebody has to communicate to others in the industry that aren't doing it, but I believe most are, at least that I'm involved with, how important it is, how it changes. So I'd like you to describe a little bit of that work and kind of where you are now, given what's happened. You talked about it a little bit, but if you could add some to that, it'd be great.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Sean, I agree with you that there are similarities between what we're going through now and what we went through with E. coli. But there's also, unfortunately, similarities between what we're going through now and what we went through in the meat industry 20 years ago. You mentioned that, we haven't had this big of a listeria outbreak since the cantaloupe issue. Before cantaloupe, the meat industry had several right in a row in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that's where we as an industry originally got together. In 2001, our executive board voted that food safety would be a not competitive for the meat and poultry industries, that we would tackle this together. A couple different things came out of that. We established what we call our Advanced Listeria Workshop that happens 2 times a year. And it is a very intense 2-day workshop with food safety professionals. They do a lot of different things in there, but one of the really cool things they do is they essentially walk through a listeria issue in a plant through a hands-on exercise and practice figuring out where is it coming from, how do I use testing to go find where positives are, do that seek and destroy mentality. So we've been doing that since 2001. We also started establishing what we call our equipment design principles, because so much of listeria is about where it can harbor in your environment, and designing your facility and your equipment so that it does not have a place where it can live, we found to be incredibly helpful. So the good news is that we have tools and we have the knowledge to get where we need to be. The bad news is we got away from it. But the good news is, unlike E. coli, I think we are better positioned to recover fast and to keep this from happening again and not have to suffer through it as long as we all did for E. coli. I can tell you that the industry is awake. They definitely took this as a wake up call. It is top discussion in every single Meat Institute board meeting we have had since July of 2024. It is top of mind for our food safety community within the Meat Institute and the broader food safety community, which is a good thing. I'm glad, Jay, that you brought up seek and destroy, because I think what has happened over the years is people have misunderstood what seek and destroy was really about. Seek and destroy does not mean I'm going to take some environmental samples and when I pop positive, I'm going to clean that piece of equipment. That is not what it means. Do you need to clean that piece of equipment when you pop positive? Absolutely. Um, but it's very unlikely that Listeria, that's the original source of the Listeria. That is probably what Jay talked to a vector. So seek and destroy, that mentality is really about finding it. And Sean, you said earlier how the regulators are not shy right now about shutting down a facility. And I think it's because they understand that true seek and destroy mentality is that, did you really find it? Or did you think you found it when you really needed to go back multiple steps in the process and truly find the true source? And sometimes we will give the same advice to our members if they are having the Listeria issue and they're not sure where they found it. Stop running, go find it before you have more product involved. So there's a lot of education going on in the industry. We continue to do that workshop, but clearly it's not enough. So one of the things we're very excited about is by the end of this summer, we will have out very broadly, publicly available some Listeria education. It should be like a 6 to 7 hour basic Listeria course. It's designed for people who know nothing about Listeria. So if you are interested, it's something that it would be available for you. We're hoping that we get a lot of folks who are in food safety roles, processing, maintenance, management, production, out there taking this education and really understanding Listeria and how it works and how you need to control it better. As just a baseline, everyone that's working in food, ready to eat foods, needs to have this understanding. So we're excited about getting that out there. And the other thing is, I'll say we have gotten call after call after call since last summer from members saying, hey, can you recommend some consultants that I can bring in to just make sure that I'm as good as I need to be? So again, I see that as a great sign that we've got folks in industry that are like, hey, this wasn't my outbreak. This wasn't my recall, but it's making me think, ooh, am I missing something? Do I need to? And I think that is a really great sign and something that makes me feel cautiously optimistic about the future.
Thank you, Sean and Dr. Ellingson. So obviously, and we've alluded to it and put some uh, specifics on it, but I'd like to ask you now, Sean, you're counseling people about what's happened, what can happen, and what's going on with regulators. So how are you tuning up businesses to maybe handle the regulators when they come in different, well, they're there all the time sometimes if it's the USDA. Maybe you should explain that to the audience a little bit. But so what's the new norm for your advice?
Well, my approach really hasn't changed.
Mhm.
I give the same advice now that I would have given a year ago. I think the urgency with which I counsel my clients to follow the advice has perhaps increased. I good colleague and friend who went through a really bad listeria issue, plant shutdown, cost millions upon millions of dollars. I was asked to get involved sort of after the problem was discovered to help right the ship. But once the ship was righted, he looked at me and he said, "Hey, Sean, the one lesson that I've learned from this experience in food safety is," and he was a corporate leader, is if I can spend, $100 today or $1 million today, I can save myself $10 million tomorrow. And I think there's always been a reluctance in industry to um, invest the needed resources and money because it's so expensive in food safety. And to a certain extent, a listeria outbreak is somewhat theoretical in that if it hasn't happened to me yet, I still hope it never will. I've seen it happen to others, but maybe I'll be okay. Um, so I think, it's difficult for some corporate leaders and especially those who are new to the industry and don't have the science backgrounds to say, okay, we're going to, shut down a line for 2 weeks because we have to disassemble it and fully clean it. But we got to meet these volume commitments. And we just, what's the risk if we just maybe wait a little bit longer? I don't know, 0.5%. Going to cost me $10 million versus a 0.5% risk. What am I going to do? So, those are the decisions I think corporate leaders are faced. So when I have conversations with, the leadership of companies, the way I describe it is, the world in this industry is changing monthly, weekly, daily in some cases. And the landscape is far different today than it was 5 or even 10 years ago. And there is this heightened awareness by the regulators in the public, even within industry. And unless we spend those resources, invest what we need to do exactly what Jay described, somebody else is going to come into our facility and either find a problem or tell us that there is a problem that they found out in the market. And then we're going to be in a very, very uncomfortable position, right? And facing all of the consequences that we witnessed in the news over the course of the last 12 months, perhaps even facing, DOJ in some cases. So it's really in our best interest, knowing that, right? If we do have issues, somebody will at some point tell us we do. But let's not get there. Let's get way out ahead of it. Let's invest the resources. Let's do what we need to do. So we're closing our exposure window to the greatest extent possible and maximizing our opportunities for success.
Yeah. And I'll jump in
Yeah,
here,
yeah,
David, and I
please.
appreciate you
Yeah.
asking that question because and Sean knows this well because he's worked with our company for many years here at Quick Trip. And I've always had the philosophy, and to our ownership said that we have to be fully transparent with all government agencies, local, state, federal. And it started way back in 2006, 2007. And I feel like, you know, you can't know everything. The supply chain has changed, and even after COVID, and I'll say it on this phone call, I think if people don't think that the supply chain in the food industry has really changed after COVID, I think they're wrong. Sometimes the government don't want to hear that. But we have been fully transparent in what we do. We actually encourage having FDA, USDA, and alike, and the states come in and look at our programs that we have here. I mean, to the point where maybe in some perspectives that they think it's like we're asking them too much. I mean, I've had a couple of states in the upper Midwest say, "You're the only company that comes and tells us about all the stuff you're doing ahead of the time that you're doing it." We got into chicken a few years ago. We let all the states and federal agencies know we were going to be cooking chicken out at our retail stores. And so, why do I think that's important? When they know your system and they understand what you're trying to accomplish, you have other sets of eyes and looking at the system, the supply chain, and that. We also, in our facilities, i.e., our USDA facility, we encourage them to bring up the stuff that they may see and not, we don't get in any defensive position. We always are like, if you see something you don't like it, say it. And so I feel like, that has been very successful for our program. Now, people have to invest in food safety and quality assurance in their organizations. And I think what's happened after these last incidents that have played out in the last 24 months is we are delving even deeper into our key suppliers in our organization to really vet out whether or not they are following good practices, not just their SOPs and the programs that they've put into place. Are they using science to vet out whether or not they have any problems coming into their facilities? And we really ask the questions, and then we ask the question whether or not there's investments happening. And that sometimes offends companies, but reality is if they don't have support, the people who think that they need to do XYZ, and they don't have that backing or resources to make it happen, that becomes an inherent risk to our organization. Because I said earlier, we serve about 12 million guests a week, and when I drive home at night, I always want to ask myself, did we do everything we could today to manage or mitigate that risk? And so Sean is dead on. You got to put the resources into the places that are most important for the organization. You have to work with your regulatory people, and I just have always felt that's so important. And I feel, again, training and education on both sides of the camp, private and public sectors, they need to work together to really figure out and help to mitigate that risk. Again, I'm going to say it again. You're not going to eliminate risk. You are going to manage risk, whatever that risk may be. So,
Uh, Thank you, Ryan. This one you can answer because you can do it generally. So, um, when in my product liability life, I learned from Mike Cerisi. It's what did you know, when did you know about it, and what did you do about it, right?
Mhm.
So, just so people understand how important it is, what our other panelists are saying about having programs and systems, it's got to be, and how does it impact your cases, right? When you are dealing with companies who are trying their hardest, right?
Mhm. Well, there's
I
in
mean,
kind of
I know you have, I mean, liability is a little different in the business, and maybe you should describe that first. But anyway,
yeah,
go
I mean, generally speaking, when individuals get sick from a food product, especially if it's a ready to eat product, it's a strict liability case, meaning that I don't have to prove that the retailer or the manufacturer was negligent. Um, However, in practice, and this is kind of trial lawyer 101, is when the biggest risk to a very very large verdict is not only the damages, but it's kind of the story of how it happened. And if you are doing everything right and despite your best practices, something happens, that's not a real enticing story to a jury. When there's a systemic failure that borders on gross negligence, wanted negligence, where there's perhaps even punitive damages, damages to punish somebody, instead of just compensatory damages, that is what really can scare a defense lawyer, I think. And that this boy, this case could be a problem if we were to go to a jury because we really kind of screwed this one up and they're really injured. And so, I think it plays a major role, and certainly that can play a role in valuation and what it's going to cost to get get things taken care of. Um, but just from a practical standpoint, the vast majority of the outbreaks that I've dealt with, it's very, very rare that the best operators who are implementing their systems in the best possible ways and verifying them and everything is working like it's supposed to. It's very, very rare that they end up having a problem. Um, Somewhat tangentially related, but also I want to just comment when Dr. Ellenson was talking, is what I think that is really, really an underrated part of the food safety program also is the role that retailers play. Even if they maybe not legally liable or they're not the main person who would be entity that would be legally liable. The retailer requirements are tremendously powerful for what I see. And that, you can't sell a Quick Trip if you're not doing the right things. Well, people want to sell a Quick Trip, people want to sell at Costco, people want to sell at Walmart and Kroger. And these, steps that these retailers are taking, saying, if you want to do business with us, these are the boxes you need to check because I'm not exposing our business to a problem like that. Because the reality is that when there is a problem, especially the consumers, yeah, if it's a popular brand like Boar's Head, perhaps they'll know that. But otherwise, they're going to be like, well, I bought deli meat at Publix, and that I got sick from Publix, you know? And so it's really everyone in the chain of distribution has been putting their reputation on the line. And so I give a lot of credit to the retailers, and I think the retailers have done a really, really good job of helping to make our food safety industry safer.
Thanks. Anybody else have anything to add about the retailers?
I-
You
I'll
do
throw,
both, Jay.
yeah, Ryan, I'll throw it out, and I appreciate you making that comment. Sean and I have had this conversation maybe over a beer or two a couple of times that I believe, and again, you're probably going to hear this for the first time. I believe FSMA was written for one reason, and that's for the industry to police or manage the industry upstream. And so, to Ryan's point, I think he's the nail on the head. I think what's going to happen over time as we move forward and things happen like this, and even though the best players they do everything in their power to try to make it the best it can be. I think eventually the retail industry is going to look back upstream and go, you need to manage risk, and these are the criteria. And 9 times out of 10, and I think this is where Ryan was headed with this, most retail companies right now set the standard. If the regulatory requirements are your baseline, companies now are ratcheting and putting that bar way above that baseline, i.e., the regulatory or regulations that are put out there. And so I think as time moves on, and if things don't change and don't get better, the retail industry is going to just turn around and go, okay, this is our criteria to get in our door. Only if you hit this bar can you be, on our shelves in our retail store. And so I know we as a company have moved in that direction significantly over the last 15, 20 years. And again, things slip through the cracks sometimes, but if you put boots on the ground, I can tell you in 15, I don't have to look at paperwork. I can tell you in 15 minutes whether or not the company has the culture, has the investment, has the system to mitigate the risk. Whether it's followed every day, that you have to investigate, but you can talk to the right people and figure out pretty quickly whether or not they're managing risk in that organization. And so I think, Ryan, I'm glad you brought that up. I think retail has made leaps and bounds, significant moves in the last 20 years, and rightfully so. That they're the ones delivering the product to the guests that are out there. And I think we all realize that, and that's Costco and everybody else out there. We need to make sure that we're buying the right stuff and people are managing the risk upstream.
Okay, we're going to turn to our crystal balls now. We have about a little bit more than 10 minutes left, but I'm going to ask it this way, and I'll start with Casey. What are the challenges and opportunities giving the cross currents of regulators uh, doing what they've ratcheted up in the last 8 months or whatever year or whatever it's been, and potentially having fewer resources to do it? What do you see?
Well, generally speaking, lately I've just been telling people that my crystal ball has a crack in it and
It's
rolls under a
broken.
sofa somewhere. But I'll do my level best. I think that on the USDA side, the administration change will change maybe how things get done, but it is not going to deter their focus on listeria. So it may change how they do things, the different tactics. We still don't have our new leadership over FSIS in the new administration yet, so that will play a huge role in how they do it. But I don't see the agency stopping their focus on listeria by any stretch of the imagination. They already have funds allocated for testing, so they're going to continue their ramped up testing of listeria. They've been clear that the questionnaires that Sean spoke of earlier, that USDA inspected establishments are getting asked questions on a weekly basis right now. They're going to be using the information from that to determine what their next steps policy-wise are. So I don't think that change will happen with FSIS. FSIS is also in a very unique position with what's happening in the federal government, and that they are generally exempt from all the things that are going on. They can rehire. They are not on a hiring freeze like many of the other public health
Mhm.
agencies are. They are not required to do a reduction in force for inspectors because those are federally mandated through a congressional act. We have to have inspectors in our plants in order for us to run. So they're a little bit unique. That doesn't mean they haven't seen issues with staffing changes. They have. Uh, they are down staff at the headquarters level, and again, they are losing institutional knowledge just like industry has. And there's a vast amount of institutional law knowledge that has been lost within the last several months. So it's going to shape things, but it's not going to keep them from asking questions. What I think is happening right now is because you've lost some of that institutional knowledge, but they're not losing focus on listeria, is you have people that are trying their best from the agency's side, but they don't know the right questions to ask. They aren't the most educated in listeria. They are behind the ball a little bit in understanding, and so the agency's got to deal with that. They have to figure out a way to kind of to better educate their force as well, so that they can be the best inspectors and keep industry on their toes. But I will say that with whatever is happening in the regulatory space, similar to what y'all were just talking about with retailers, is that my general rule of thumb is that if you are a company that is so focused on meeting the regulatory requirements, you are not going to have a great food safety program. The regulatory requirements should be a breeze for you to master if you have a truly robust, good food safety program. An ideal food safety program is going to be is an extremely high, robust bar where you feel comfortable because you're up here. Your customers require you to be here, and the federal regulations require you to be here. So you should be way above the basic regulatory requirements in a very good food safety program to where that's just like, oh, of course we're meeting those. We have a program. Taylor's credit, I'll give the food service community credit as well. They're, both retailers and food service industries over the years have kept industry on our toes, and they are always kind of ratcheting up their expectations as they should. Because again, to your point, if there's a supplier of a product going to a major food service restaurant, it's the same as a retailer. That's whose name gets in the news. It's the retailer or the food service person, not necessarily the supplier.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all your input so far. We'll go to you now, Ryan. What's your concerns about the future, other than we don't want
Uh,
people to get sick, which is the most important thing, but
I'm very concerned. I'm very, very concerned. I mean, I don't, I don't know how some of us can do our job, with the, with, the inability to get records, just the uncertainty of it all. One day we don't know if we have EIS officers, the next day they maybe have an EIS. I think that the chaos is bad for everyone. That we rely on certainty. Industry relies on certainty. But I wish I wish I had a different thought. But you know, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. So I guess I would say deeply concerned.
thank you. And thanks for joining us. It's three against one, so four.
I wouldn't say it that way. Like I said earlier, we're all on the same team.
Luckily, you're a great person and you haven't ticked these guys off, and they're good
Yeah,
people
right.
too.
I don't know about that.
Okay, Jay.
Yeah, I'm probably more with Ryan than not. I am a little concerned. We had a call yesterday with some of the industry, some regulators, both at USDA and with FDA. There were a few state folks on it, and then a few retailers, a few production manufacturing groups. And we were talking about all the changes. And, you talk about rapid response, you talk about when are you going to get this information? So that whole world in itself is completely that's going to be a challenge just to get the information. But I feel like the companies, everything's a bell-shaped curve, right? The companies who are doing it well right now are going to continue to do it well. Those changes won't impact them. The companies who are kind of on the bubble, where's that going to go if they're just meeting regulatory requirements right now? Again, what does that mean long term if, you don't have an
You guys
inspector
are
or
just
somebody?
destroying We met the regulations defense in court. Dude, it's killing.
So, and then there's the group that are trying to ratchet up their programs and now hearing that maybe they may not be out there as much. Again, good culture will move it to the top of the curve. If not, it could move it to the other direction. So I think what's going to happen is, again, working with your regulatory people, even though there may be fewer of them, you need to still work with them. And then you also need to start really looking at your supply chain and figuring out who's in and who's out. Because if the inspectors are there, it's great. If they're not, they still have to have it great. Otherwise, you shouldn't buy from them. And so, just being honest with you, that is what we're hearing in the industry collectively, that people are really looking at what are the companies out there that are ratcheting things up, even with all this chaos going on. So that's kind of where we're at with it.
Thank you, Dr. Ellingson, and thanks for your participation.
You bet.
You get the last word, Sean.
Well, thank you, David. I'll be the optimist here. I've been doing this a long time, and I've described what has happened over time as the food safety revolution, dating back to Jack in the Box and all the changes that flowed from that occurrence. And the industry, scientifically and from a regulatory standpoint, has made tremendous progress over the course of the last 3 decades. It's created incredible momentum. If we look at, break down retail in the future and regulators in the future, there's a lot of retailers and food service establishments or organizations that 10 years ago really didn't have much of a food safety crew or departments or resources. And they've been building those out with tremendous success and pushing additional requirements down, upstream to industry and creating higher standards and higher benchmarks. And I don't see that being dialed back because it's in everybody's, at least at the retail level, their interest to continue to pressure their supply chain. From the regulatory standpoint, one thing that I think has been true over the course of history, at least this country, is regulatory agencies continue over time on a whole to grow, right? And even if there is a moment in our history where perhaps a mole is removed or an organ is removed or there's something from the body that's taken away, the body will continue to grow and over time it will flourish. And I think there will be a point where the chaos we see right now will be in the rearview mirror. So I, think of the stock market, over time will go up. We maybe see a drop and a blip, but it's going to continue on that trend over time. So as I look forward, I like to say, where are we going to be in 5 years? And I do think that I don't think we're going to be worse. I think we'll continue to press with the, momentum that we've created. And there probably will be some blips and there'll be some bad actors. But my hope is that industry as a whole picks us all up and we continue on that trajectory that we've been on for the last 3 decades.
All right, thank you. I have taken the questions from the chat and asked them as we have gone. All we have now in the chat is compliments on what a great job you all did.
Yeah, right.
So I won't specifically state them, but I'll just that it was fantastic. I really enjoyed talking with you all. I'd like to make this a monthly occurrence, whether anybody else is listening or not. It's just tremendously educational, and the perspectives are greatly appreciated. So, with that, I will say thank you again. Enjoy spring and have a great upcoming weekend. And we
Thanks,
are
guys.
done. Yep.
Thanks
Thanks
for that.
all.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. Appreciate the time.